So let's now turn to Skinner v. Oklahoma. Um, Skinner v. Oklahoma is seen as a limitation upon Buck v. Bell, because that question in Skinner v. Oklahoma was Oklahoma's Habitual Criminal Sterilization Act. This act in particular provided for compulsory sterilization after a third felony for crimes involving quote unquote moral turpitude. Um, Moral turpitude had a broad definition, and it was sort of any felony-based action that impinged upon the rights of other individuals. So theft, um, even petty larceny, but also more important or more broadly based personal assaults, like rape, murder, manslaughter, those sorts of things. But moral turpitude was a broad category of issues. And so the question very clearly in this case was the Habitual Criminal Sterilization Act um, a violation of, and at this point it's, the court isn't clear, they're like due process, 14th Amendment, the court's not at all clear until they actually answer the case. And then they recognize certain things as fundamental. And as soon as the court says fundamental, what they're saying is 14th Amendment equal protection. Fundamental rights are folded into the Constitution through the 14th Amendment. So what does the court say in this case? They make the argument that not only marriage, but procreation are fundamental rights of the human race. And here's how they get there. They say in the case that we are dealing here with legislation which involved one of the most basic civil rights of man. Marriage and procreation are fundamental to the very existence and survival of the human race. There is no redemption for the individual whom this law touches. Any experiment which the state conducts is to his irreparable injury, and he is forever denied or deprived of his basic liberty. And so that the state can, under exceedingly rare circumstances, take these most fundamental of rights away from individuals, those rights being marriage and procreation. And the argument here is that there, in order for the species to survive, procreation must take place. And therefore, it is the most basic of drives for the human race is to procreate and reproduce. Although there is that sort of moralistic guidance over the top of this within the confines of marriage. And so if you're taking away from an individual the ability to procreate, you're taking away from them a fundamental part of the human condition. And therefore, they argue that this is a fundamental right, that it's not in the Constitution, because none of the constitutional drafters would have envisioned this as the sort of punishment, that this is an inherent right that one does not have to look to the Constitution to get, that one simply gets this because they're human. It's a human-based right. It's a basic liberty. But this absolutely does not overturn Buck v. Bell. It limits the breadth of Buck v. Bell, but it absolutely does not overturn it, and it really doesn't distinguish the practice within areas in which any sort of moral mental retardation, any of those areas, it just does it in terms of criminal nature. So if you were, this could not be an extension of punishment of a criminal nature. The Supreme Court goes on a little bit and say, we advert to these issues of fundamental right, an emphasis of our view that strict scrutiny of the classification which a state makes in a sterilization law is essential. So states must beat strict scrutiny in order to demonstrate that these laws are okay. And the argument here is that these states that had these sterilization laws on the books for individuals who were of less intellectual background, that the state had an interest in protecting overpopulation, wards of the state, and all of these sorts of health-based issues, which is why places like the Colony in Virginia were able to exist until 1972. But from this point forth, there's a significant limitation on Buck v. Bell, but the practice still moves forward in time. And so this is seen as a criminal protection, but it also, importantly for us, in the evolution of law in this area, recognizes that at the very minimums, marriage and procreation within the marriage confines are fundamental rights. And that's why this case is important. And that's why this case helps launch us into the evolution we see in the cases going forward.